If you're a woman in your 40s dealing with recurring sciatica, hip pain, or that deep ache in your groin area, you don't need more stretching. In this podcast episode, I'll unpack 3 common alignment cues that are probably making your sciatica worse and tell you what to do instead. Number 1, stop squaring your hips. Start balancing your pelvis instead. Number 2, stop stretching, start stabilizing. Number 3, stop bracing your core, start creating true core connection. So here's the problem. You bend down to pick something up and you have that sharp shooting pain like a lightning bolt run through your leg. Or you have that deep, dull ache in your hip that wakes you up at night. Or your groin start pinching and pulling after you've been sitting for a long time. You've probably tried stretching, foam rollers, and endless hip openers, but nothing's really working, and you're wondering if you're making things worse. That's what's so frustrating about sciatica. The source is elusive because of all the structures in this part of the body. There are many different nerve endings that all bundle together and then become the sciatic nerve, which is like the tap root of your spinal cord. Because it's complex, it's hard to pinpoint where the pain is coming from. Is it your hamstring, your piriformis, your disc, your nerve? Is it your SI joint? You can get lost in the search to pinpoint where and why and when it started, but more important is what to do about it. In my experience, most sciatica and low back pain and hip pain and groin pain comes from an imbalance in the pelvis. Not just tightness or weakness, but a pelvis that is confused and has lost its ability to move naturally. So that's what you're going to learn today. You're going to learn how to balance your pelvis, how to strengthen the muscles around it so it stays that way, and how to develop true core connection for support from the inside out. Hi, I'm Allison. I've been teaching yoga and movement science for almost 20 years, and I've lived through this myself. I played competitive soccer when I was younger, so my pelvis was a little bit off from all the asymmetry. Despite all the hip squaring and all the stretching and all the core work, nothing made it better. In fact, when I was at my most flexible and my pose practice was at its most impressive, my sciatica was at its worst. When I started strengthening and stabilizing my pelvis, the sciatica went away, my SI joint got better, and I was able to run again, something I'd given up 12 years ago. By the end of this episode, you'll never want to square your hips again. You'll understand why overstretching can be detrimental and why your sciatica keeps coming back when you do that. You'll also know why bracing your core is not the same as deep core and how your breathing may be contributing to your sciatica, your hip pain, and your groin tension. Even better is by the end of this episode, you'll know how to adjust your alignment so you balance your pelvis instead of square the hips. You'll know exactly what muscles you need to work to stabilize your pelvis, and you'll know how to generate true core through every breath you take. So here's our plan. First, stop squaring your hips, start balancing your pelvis. Second, stop stretching, start strengthening. Last, stop bracing your core, start building true core connection. Square your hips is one of the most common cues you will hear in yoga and other movement modalities. In Warrior 2, in triangle, even twists. But your pelvis is not a block. The two sides actually move somewhat independently of one another. So treating the pelvis like a block and creating a square-like action in the pelvis is unnatural. It puts a lot of strain on the hip joint, the knee, the SI joint, and the sacrum. Let's look at some anatomy. The pelvis has 2 sides, and the 2 sides don't actually touch. In the front, you have the pubic symphysis, which is a thick piece of cartilage, and in the back, you have the sacrum, which is part of the spine. It's wedged into the pelvis, and its intersection with the pelvis is called the SI joint, the sacroiliac joint. Instead of a block, I encourage you to see the pelvis as like the wings of a bird. They're always together, they move together, they create movement together, and they can move somewhat independently of one another. And we see this in walking. So the two sides of the pelvis can tilt forward, can tilt backward, in flare, out flare, a little up and down. All of this can happen together and or somewhat independently of one another. Occasionally, you see the sides of the pelvis get stuck doing different things. For example, my right side was a little bit forward, anterior tilt, and a little bit inward, in flare. And that put a lot of stress and strain on my right SI joint, and most of my sciatic pain was running down the right side. What does this mean for sciatica? The sciatic nerve is not one nerve, it's many nerves that exit your low back, your sacrum, and then bundle together and travels through or near or partially through your piriformis, hence the relationship of sciatica and piriformis syndrome, before traveling down and spreading out through your legs. So you can think of the sciatic nerve like the taproot of the spinal cord, and it innervates your lower body. It's hard to diagnose where sciatic pain is coming from unless there's a significant problem with one of the discs, because there are so many exits, so many nerve fibers coming out through the low back, out through the sacrum, and then they're all bundling together before they travel down your leg. This is why balancing the pelvis is so important. It can take pressure off of many of those nerve endings, and it can de-escalate the tension in your piriformis, which may be contributing to some of the pain you feel in your hip, in your groin, or running down your leg. Because modern humans spend so much time sitting, the pelvis is compromised with the alignment of the bones, the musculature around the pelvis, and the deep core. Studies show up to 40% of adults will experience sciatic pain, and women are disproportionately affected because of the mobility of the pelvis, because of the changes in the hormone cycle, and the different architecture in terms of bones. So what do we do about it? In yoga, there's this cue of square your hips, and it's unnatural for the pelvis to do that because of its architecture, because of how it moves, because we want that rhythm of walking to be with us and carry us our whole lives. So instead of squaring your hips, use this to balance your pelvis. The front leg always needs more not only, external rotation. The back leg needs more, not only, internal rotation. You want to drive the rotation of the hips from the femur bones and the hip joints. Sounds obvious, but many movement practitioners are trained to move their hips from their hip points, from their ilia, which makes no sense anatomically, instead of from the femur bones and the actual joint. When this is done well, the action of the femur bones and the rotation of the hips are like interlocking gears. And when they catch, they feed power into the pelvic floor and the deep core of the body. Let's look at this in Warrior 2. The cue is square your hips to the long edge of your mat, which if you do that, 99.9% of the time, your knee will drop in unless you force it to do something else. Instead of yanking your hips around into that square position, allow your front hip to externally rotate more and watch how the knee will then naturally track over the second and third toe. And then let the back hip roll in a little bit so you have some internal rotation. Work with those currents of connection, those interlocking gears, until you feel a sense of lift and power in your pelvic floor. And it's almost like it feeds all the way up through your spine to the crown of your head. And then you extend your arms, and then you can turn the chest to the long edge of the mat, but don't let it affect your pelvis, and definitely don't let it affect your front knee. Similar is the cue in triangle to imagine you're in between two panes of glass. What a terrible cue. Why has it been said for decades? And I'll quote Annie Carpenter here. She said, "We told people to do that until we found out it was hurting them." The evolution of this cue is the same as in Warrior 2. Allow for the external rotation on the front hip. Allow for a little bit of internal rotation on the back hip. You'll feel that natural lift through the pelvic floor, and then you'll be able to lengthen through both sides evenly and consistently. This is great for your spine, great for your pelvis, great for your leg bones. So our first principle for reducing sciatic pain, hip pain, groin pain is stop squaring your hips, start balancing your pelvis. Warrior 2 and Triangle are two excellent examples, and this axiom holds up everywhere. Front leg needs more, not only external rotation. Back leg needs more, not only internal rotation. Find the place where they're like interlocking gears and you feel power moving from the pelvic floor up through the core of your body. If you have a 20-minute miracle toolkit, there's a practice in it called Currents of Connection for Pelvic Floor Power. Long name, powerful practice. On to principle number 2, stop stretching, start strengthening. When something hurts, the tendency is to stretch it, but most women already have plenty of mobility. What we need is stability. A 2021 study in the Journal of Orthopedic Research found that most women with low back pain had weak hamstrings and weak glute medius, glute minimus. These are the exact muscles that stabilize the pelvis. A yoga cue that has been problematic for the hamstrings and glute med, glute min is sitting bones back and apart. That might be a good cue for a male pelvis, again, because the male pelvis is more narrow, more stable, less space in between the sitting bones. But for a female pelvis, especially during certain hormonal cycles, it's destabilizing for the hamstrings, for the hamstring attachments, for the sacrum, for the SI joint, for the hip joints in general. This is why we see hamstring injuries and SI dysfunction among the top 5 overuse injuries in the yoga population. So what do we do instead? Instead of stretching and sitting bones back and apart and trying to open the hips, you're going to ground the sitting bones down, which will activate the hamstrings, and hug glute med, glute min in. These two muscle groups are the key to stabilizing your pelvis. When your pelvis is stable, you get more out of your pelvic floor. Your sacrum gets this wonderful hug from your deep core, from your outer hip muscles, from your low belly, and then it moves in that nice little nod that sets off the rhythm that runs through your whole spine. But it's not moving so much that it's unstable or compressing your lower back, but it's not so locked that you're stuck rocked back with a rounded lower back, flat butt, or rocked forward where your butt sticks out and you get that crunchy scrunchy forever in your low back. Here are 3 movements to strengthen your hamstrings and your outer hips and stabilize your pelvis. 1 is butterfly bridge. You want to feel the outer hips and the hamstrings hug in, and then it's like the pelvis is lifted on a sling. 2, clamshells with a resistance band. I recommend pressing your fingers into the outer hip. You want a bullseye of engagement here. That's glute med, glute min. 3, bridge on a block. You want your heels on the edge of the block. You're pressing them down and pulling them back to get the hamstrings to engage, and then you can lightly lift 1 foot at a time. You can sprinkle these poses into your practice. You can put them together as a mini sequence to stabilize your pelvis. If you want more, check out the Yoga for Sciatica practice here on YouTube. So that wraps up point number 2. Instead of stretching and opening, focus on strengthening and stabilizing. On to point number 3. Instead of bracing your core, develop true core connection. So you've probably been told to engage your abs, pull your low belly up and in, tuck your tailbone down, brace your core, and you're wondering why none of this is working. It's because your core is more than muscles. It's actually a pressurized system. When you do too much engagement or bracing of your abdominal region, you often create an inverted breathing pattern and you're putting more pressure on your pelvic floor, your sacrum, and your lower back, and you don't even know it. So what is true core? What is intra-abdominal pressure? Let's talk about why we don't have it naturally. And it's largely due to sitting and getting stuck with your butt back and your ribs forward. And when your butt is back and your ribs are forward, your diaphragms are not stacked. So they cannot talk to one another and generate intra-abdominal pressure. So the first thing to do is you pull your ribs in and back, which requires some strength building. And then you pull the pelvis down, stabilize the pelvis, which is that hamstring, glute med, glute min equation. When your rib cage and pelvis is stacked, then the diaphragms are stacked and they can start talking. And we want them to move in rhythm. So the inhale, the respiratory diaphragm moves down, it widens, flattens, descends. And we want the same thing with the pelvic floor, a widening, flattening, descending. And then on the exhale, the inverse happens. The pelvic floor lifts up and in, and the respiratory diaphragm lofts up and in, and that's its resting position. So inhale, diaphragm moves down, pelvic floor moves down. Exhale, pelvic floor up and in, respiratory diaphragm up and in. Research shows that this synchronized breathing for core improves your posture and reduces strain on the low back region by up to 30%. Here are 2 exercises to help you find that relationship of rib cage and pelvis so the diaphragms are stacked, and then you're going to be breathing to recreate that natural rhythm and generate intra-abdominal pressure. Pose number 1 is core press at the wall. Your feet are at the wall, knees bent 90 degrees. I recommend hands on lower ribs. You'll breathe and expand your ribs front, back, side to side on the inhale. On your exhale, lightly press your heels into the wall. You want a little bit of tone at the hamstrings near the sitting bones, and then you'll feel the pelvic floor lift up and in, and the ribs are going to come in and down. That's what you're going to get from the diaphragm. So again, you're going to inhale, ribs expand front, back, side to side. Pelvic floor widens, flattens, and moves to the wall a little bit. And then on your exhale, there's that light tone at the hamstring attachments. Pelvic floor draws up and in, ribs draw in and down. Pose number 2 is core pedaling. I recommend a band on your feet, and you're going to start in that same position, knees at 90 degrees, hands on ribs, this time no wall. And with your exhale, you're going to extend one leg out. Inhale, draw in. Exhale, extend the other leg out. Inhale, draw in, and continue to pedal the feet for some time. And this teaches you how to maintain the core through your breathing while moving with your legs. Very important for our daily lives. So instead of the bracing and the gripping and the sucking and the tucking, breathe. Allow your breathing to generate your core for you. Yes, this will ask for some retraining in terms of postural alignment, and many students start wrestling with good and bad here because they're so used to the ribs forward, butt back, and thinking that gives them good posture, that being stacked will actually make them feel like they're rounded for a while. So wrestle with that, and you will be rewarded with more core strength and stability than you ever imagined. So these are your keys to reducing and relieving sciatic pain. Number 1, stop squaring your hips, start balancing your pelvis. Number 2, stop stretching, start strengthening. Number 3, stop bracing your core, build true core connection. Especially if your sciatic pain, your hip pain, your low back stiffness, that deep, achy groin psoas stuff is recurring. It's not going away no matter what you're doing. It is likely a misalignment, a misperception that is keeping you stuck. Use these principles. Do the yoga for sciatic pain relief practice. If you want more, there's an abundance of practices in the 20-Minute Miracle Toolkit. And if you want my help to guide you through this to make it personalized for your body, schedule a call, we'll chat. Even if we don't work together, I will give you things that you can implement today that will change your practice forever. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. See you soon.